Okay, hi everybody. This is Jiba Torado. This is take two. Apparently, my computer and my Wi-Fi did not want me to be great, and so I'm having to restart the whole entire broadcast. And this is the beauty about talking of when you're talking about transition. I always find it interesting that anytime you are getting ready to speak on something, on a specific topic, when you're writing a book, when you're teaching a certain subject, um, usually you end up going through some type of event or trial that is going to help you to demonstrate your ability of proficiency in that specific topic. And so for me, I'm having to transition. I literally was on my computer. The internet don't want me to be great, so I had to transition to my phone. Hopefully we can make this a smooth transition. Anyways, as I was talking about earlier, and I'm just going to kind of run through from the beginning and just talking about the fact that there are many different types of transitions. Some transitions are emotional, professional, financial, physical. And one of the questions that I asked a couple weeks ago was, what kind of transitions do you find yourself in this season? And for many of us, 2020 has been a year of many change. I know of people who have seen growth. I know of people who have seen deficits. I know of people who have had to rethink how they see the world, their perspective, and all those good things. And as I was thinking about this topic, and as I was seeing different people in my circle or my timeline moving from one place to another, it got me thinking about the idea that a lot of times we don't see the in between steps of people making transitions. We just kind of see the point A to point Z, and we miss the in between letters. And so I wanted to give an opportunity to talk about how transitions happen, or what are some of the ingredients to be able to have optimal change, because transition is simply another word. It's a process of going from one condition to another, right? It's just a process of change. And I was thinking about this today, how as an educator, having taught in elementary school, when students come to kindergarten, for example, there are times when students, depending on their home life and their home environment, they may not have touched a pencil before. They may have not seen a book before. They may not have been used to transitioning in their home from one play activity to another. And because of that, it makes it difficult for them to enter into kindergarten successfully. And for some kids, after they adapt over a couple months, things are fine. But for others, you notice that some students really do struggle to go from one station to another, and they throw a tantrum and they cry, or they get mad, and their whole day is ruined. And because of this repeated pattern of behavior, the teacher will then engage in maybe an evaluation after contacting parents and contacting their resources in the building to see, hey, can we evaluate this kid? Is there maybe a deficiency in their abilities, in their learning capacity? Is there a deficiency in their mental capacity? Is there a deficiency? Is this just a thing of immaturity? A lot of times you may have kids who are brilliant, they're really smart academically, but the school system will say, no, you cannot move them forward for lack of maturity. And so we see how even in the educational setting, for example, whereas a child may have to be evaluated for the sake of how they transition, yet when we become adults, we are expected to do this transitioning effortlessly without really having been taught how to do it properly. I don't know about you guys, but I have enough student loans for some of the degrees that I have, and not one of those degrees required me to take a class called coping with life 101, right? There is this expectation that this ability to cope with transition, with change, is going to be learned somewhere, right, outside of your academic journey, maybe your parents, maybe. But even when you are in a wholesome family dynamic, these are not conversations that are always had amongst family members. Nobody, I don't know anybody who really sits down and say, hey, like, let me teach you about, what happens when you transition. And the transition period, sometimes conversations are about, okay, your body's changing, you're growing up, here's what's going to happen, you're going to high school. But really, what are some of the ingredients that are essential to being able to have a optimal transition, right? And so one of the things I mentioned before is that I'm very familiar with change and transitions in general, because I went from being in Ivory Coast to the Democratic Republic of Congo. I went from having two parents to being an orphan. I went from moving from the Congo to the United States. I went from learning different language, knowing one language to learning a different language, from being a reader to becoming an author, a mom, a wife, all of these things that are, processes of change. And so I'm very familiar with the emotional roller coaster that can take place when you are experiencing those adjustments. And as I thought about it, I'm excited because in the next couple weeks, I'm going to have some conversations and dialogues with women and with people that I've seen who have done who have made life changes in their specific career, in their spirituality, in their physical abilities, to be able to go from one condition to another. And I believe out of all of these people, when we start having these conversations, these foundational ingredients are very important. Today, I asked the question, which one do you find the hardest? Discernment, decision, determination, or discipline, right? And this was really for me to kind of see. I know for myself, I would say probably discipline is something that, depending on what area we're talking about, that can be a challenge. And from the people who responded on my status, I can see that discipline was also an area for many people that they struggle with. But I believe that these four ingredients are essential for optimal change. Now, discernment. I love looking up the definitions of words. Discernment, right? This, if you just look up on Google, discernment, it gives you, it's the ability to show good judgment. And I laughed when I saw that, because I thought about the idea that it really depends on what a person defines as good. And a lot of times, right, sometimes we can have this whole opposite of, am I discerning something between good and bad? But there are times when, in making change, we have to really have a discernment between what is good and what is best, or what is best and what is better, or what is good and what is good. And that sometimes can be difficult, because you're asking yourself, do I take this job or do I take this job? Do I move here or do I not move here? The pros and cons sometimes are not completely different. And so having that discernment to be able to make a decision is very important, right? So that is the second one, decision. The definition of decision is making a choice that you make after thinking and talking about what is best, right? It's a conclusion or a resolution reached after consideration. The important thing to notice here is that these two kind of go hand in hand. It's really hard to make a decision when you have not yet discerned what it is that need to be changed, right? Sometimes the transitions are voluntary, right? I chose to get married. Sometimes the transitions are involuntary. I did not choose for my parents to die at a young age. And so here I am having to transition from being in a two-parent home to now having to be sent to different places and different people, right? So sometimes the changes are involuntary, but it is important to discern what is happening, what is going on, what needs to change in order to then be able to make the decision that is needed to execute the change. The third thing ingredient is the determination. And when I think of determination, I think of the why, right? When you look up the definition of determination, it talks about the firmness of purpose, right? It's a fixed intention to achieve a desired end, right? It's the process of establishing something exactly by calculation and research. And so determination to me is kind of like the why behind what it is that you might be changing, what it is that you might be experiencing. And then the last thing is the discipline. Now, discipline definition amazing because a lot of times you kind of just find that idea of the practice of training people to obey rules, usually through punishment or, and then they had a different definition talking about orderly or prescribed conduct or pattern of behavior. And I love that one definition said self-control. Self-control is something that many people struggle with because a lot of times our nature wants to do opposite of what we know to be right, and that's just our sin nature. And so being able to have the self-control, right, to be able to continue in the discipline of doing whatever it is that you decided to is really, really important. And so I want to give you an example of how these things kind of apply, right, specifically to my life. And just talking about, the whole concept of this live series is talking about turning tables and moving past fear and stepping into transition. No matter what transition you may be facing, whether it be financial, whether it be professional, whether it be relational, whether it be mental, emotional, there is oftentimes a level of fear that we as people sense, right, that causes us to kind of freeze. It causes us to maybe discern that there is a need for change, but instead of allowing ourselves to then make the decision to change, then we kind of just pause, right? Or sometimes we say, okay, well, I'm going to decide to change, but then we don't put the discipline and the boundaries in place in order to be able to execute those change. Or sometimes we decide prematurely that we're going to change without necessarily taking the time to think through what is best and to actually come to a resolution that is researched and that is calculated. And therefore, we kind of stay there with the decision, never actually implementing it. Or sometimes we may say, man, I really want to do this, and we know the why behind it, but we don't actually take the time to then look through and discern, okay, well, what exactly, like, my why coming from a place of purity? Is my why coming from a place of prayer? Is my why coming from a place of pain? Is my why coming from a place of pride? And you have people who will then get stuck in these different components, and maybe they have one ingredient and not the other. And I believe that in order to move past fear and step into transition, the ingredients have to flow almost like a pie, a cycle, because in any places that you find yourself, you are continuously doing the same thing over and over. And people who have successfully transitioned from one place to another, depending on what life brings them, they are able to look at these ingredients and use what it is that they need. So I'll give you an example. I was going to school for a long time to become a doctor. My biological father was a doctor. He was into optometry, and I just wanted to be like him. And so growing up, I said, man, I'm gonna be just like my dad. Well, eventually, my father passed away. I moved here to the United States, and as I was thinking, I kept changing. I'm like, no, I think I want to go maybe surgery. I think I was watching some show. And then next thing I knew, I was like, oh, research sounds really cool. And who knows? My mind was all over the place. And I remember in about 10th grade, I started working with children, and I was part of this organization called Big Brother, Big Sisters. And I just love being able to be with these kids. And I told myself, you know what? I got it. I am going to go to medical school to become a pediatrician. And so when I went, I enrolled in my undergrad, I enrolled as pre-med. I was going to be a bio major. Things were going to be great. And as I proceeded after my first year, my second year, in my third year, I started discerning this almost this interest in what I was doing. My grades were not necessarily the best, and I knew that I was capable of doing the work, but for whatever reason, it really wasn't translating on paper. Mind you, I was also working, but for whatever reason, I just could not put my fingers on it. And I kept telling myself, man, my dad died. I told him I would become like him. And in my immature mind, not being able to transition and heal from that grieving period, I told myself that the only way my dad would be proud of me is if I became a doctor just like him. Mind you, the man had been dead for over 10 years, right? And I don't specifically remember a conversation where he said, you must, right? But these are the things that I was holding on to, as if by me becoming a doctor, somehow, some way, maybe it would bring him back to life. I have no clue what I was thinking. But essentially, I started discerning, right? There were things in my life that were showing my grade, my lack of interest, just how much I didn't enjoy going into these classes anymore. And it got me thinking, okay, what is it that is bringing me joy, right? And so, in looking at my work with children, I was like, man, this is bringing me life. I love seeing these children's faces light up when I am able to break down knowledge for them to be able to understand and them to be able to move forward. And so in that moment, I went and I talked to my advisor. This is how I was doing my research. I talked to my advisor. I talked to my former principals. I talked to the people who were in my life and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. I'm really thinking about now going towards the medical school route, and I'm thinking about going towards the master's in teaching route. And a lot of the people that were in my life were like, oh man, that's a no-brainer, go for it. And then I also had people in my life who told me, you're settling, you're not you're not using your brains, because obviously being a teacher is not using my brain, whatever. You always going to have positive and negative feedback. And sometimes that is also the issue. We don't move forward with a decision because we're so concerned about the negativity that people have to say in our decision making, right? And so for me, I'm like, okay, well, I'm still going to be able to make a decent living. I'm still going to be able to impact lives. Thanks for coming out, but no thanks, right? And so I was able to say, okay, let me see what else I can do. So I talked to different people about what I was thinking. And my determination was my why. I knew that I was going to be able to impact the lives of these young people. And so, even though I was on the track for being a bio major and going to med school, I had to switch and apply to the, teaching program. And the teaching program at Christopher Newport University is about a year, and I wasn't taking any classes that had to do with education. I mean, there was so many loops that I had to go through applying and all of that. And it almost seemed like a mountain. But when I got into the program and I started taking the classes, it came with so much ease that it was a confirmation to me that I was in the right place, right? And so now I not only discerned that something was off through my grades and my own emotions and kind of what I was seeing, but I made the decision to move forward, and I had the determination, which was my why. But now I needed to have the discipline to be able to continue and move forward. And so for me, my focus was on that graduation date. My focus was like, okay, I know I want to achieve this diploma or this degree, but at the same time, what are some of my measurable goals in order to be able to make this attainable? And a lot of times people, we struggle with discipline in achieving the change or in achieving whatever it is that we're trying to achieve, because we're looking at it from a holistic perspective. I'm a big believer in fractional wins. I think fractional wins are so important. I remember when I taught fifth grade, my fifth graders hated when we got to the unit of fractions, because one is just this small numbers and, it doesn't make sense. And why is this? Why is that? But, those fractions will then turn into whole numbers. And sometimes they even become mixed numbers. And so, I think that in order for us to be able to see the change, right, and have that discipline, we have to start actually valuing, right, the fractional wins, because those fractional wins are what's going to turn into the big picture, the whole, right? And so a lot of times when I'm talking about these ingredients with people or just kind of discussing it, we like to think, oh man, discernment is so hard, and decision is so hard, and determination is so hard, and discipline is so hard. I just want to suggest to you that it doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be one or the other. All the ingredients work as one. And it's not about which component is the hardest, but which one am I not making a priority? At the end of the day, it comes down to which ones am I making a priority? Because when you get to a place where you have the discernment, you've discerned what needs to be done, you have made the decision onto what you're going to do, you have allow yourself to be determined, you know what your why is, you're doing the grind. Even in your discipline, you have to be flexible with yourself to discern what is working and what is not working. When someone starts a business for the first time, they may have had this grandiose idea, ideally on paper, on a business plan, but you get out there and you realize that that's not what the people need, or that's not the feedback that you're receiving. And so you have to be willing to then go back to the cycle and say, okay, I'm discerning that something is off. My profits are not coming the way I want them to. And what is it that I need to tweak, and make the decision to tweak it? And then again, what is your why, right? And then practice the discipline to continue to be able to see those results. And so it's a continual process. And if all four ingredients, if all four components are a priority, then I can move accordingly, knowing that they are all intertwined. One does not have to, be above the other. And so some of the things that are important in order to be able to move past fear, right, is not only discerning that the change needs to happen, but to be able to have a community of people, to be able to ask the question like, hey, what do you see? When is the last time you asked your friends or your family members, like, hey, is there anything that you feel like I need to change? Is there anything that, and it doesn't always have to be negative. Sometimes you could be doing something really great and your family's like, man, I really think that you are gifted in this. And I think you can be moving in this arena, right? It can be negative, but it doesn't always have to be negative. And then being able to make a decision. This part right here, a lot of times we stop here because we're trying to make decision based on our feelings and not our facts. Don't get me wrong, our emotions are important, but they also fluctuating. They can also be temporary. And so it's important that when you're making decisions that can be long lasting, that you're not just landing your decision based on a feeling foundation, because then that will be unstable, right? And so once you make that decision, you have to really ask yourself, okay, what is my why? Your why is going to drive your determination. Your why is what is going to force you to execute. Your why is important. And sometimes there has been times where I've wanted to do something, but I have to pause and ask myself, okay, like, is this thing coming from a place of purity? Is this coming from a place of prayer? Is this coming from a place of pain? Is this coming from a place of pride? And if it's not coming from a place of purity and prayer and process and purpose, and it's just really coming from a place of pain and pride, I know it's not going to serve any good for me or anyone else, right? So I really have to stop and ask myself, what is my why, and what is the foundation of my why? And then from there, I can then talk about what discipline is required in order to be able to execute. In that discipline, I need to make sure that I'm setting up a system that helps me win. I need to set up a system that helps me win. If my goal is to lose weight, right, I need to set up a system where I'm going to bed early so that I can wake up the next day and have energy to work out. If my goal is to write a book, I need to make sure that I'm sacrificing an hour, every single day to be able to write. If my goal is to be productive in whatever ways, I may need to look at my settings in my phone and my screen time and put a limit on how much time I'm on social media. Like, there are things that you can do to be able to make sure that you are productive. And so when we talk about discipline being something that is hard, it's not necessarily hard. It's more so the fact that we are not willing to make it a priority, and we don't value it in our value system of whatever it is, that whatever value system that you may have, and something else is taking the place of that, whatever is taking priority. And so it's important to stop playing yourself, right? Just stop playing yourself, and say to yourself, you know what? I need all four ingredients. If I have made and discerned that there's time I need to change, if I have made the decision, right? If I know my why, I can continuously walk in this cycle of evaluating it, elaborating it, engaging in it, and executing it. I mean, it is a continual thing that you have to. And the more you do it, I think the less afraid you become to, one, fail, because you are being an active learner. You are okay with the idea that I may change my mind. It's okay to say that I may have tried and I may have failed, and I'm going to get up and do it again, right? Unfortunately, we live in a culture now where you get canceled for having a different opinion, or you get canceled because maybe you change your mind, right? I'm not talking about foundational truth and truth and things that are just, I'm not going to argue on. But the thing about it is, a lot of times we are people, in French, there's this saying that, only imbeciles don't change their mind. And so as people who are evolving, who are growing, who are transitioning, not only in our bodies, right, from we're going from one age to another, but we transition emotionally, we transition spiritually, we transition mentally. It is okay if you have to revisit the cycle, right, of your ingredients, and say to yourself, you know what, I think in this season I'm going to apply this, or I think in this season I need a little bit more of this, because sometimes I cook with a little bit more adobo than I do with salt, and sometimes I cook with a little bit more salt than I do with adobo, right? It all depends on what it is that I'm making. And so this whole idea of one size fit all and it all has to be the same, I don't think is correct. And so these are some of the things that I have learned in being able to turn the tables around, and being able to transition and make optimal change that are healthy for me, for others. And sometimes they may not necessarily be right, and I have to be willing to own that and get back on the bike and get back on the train and say, okay, what exactly do I need? What am I discerning? What do I need to decide? What is going to be my determination? And what discipline and system do I need to be, to put in place to continue to maintain the change that I want to see? So, anyways, I hope that that was informative for somebody. I hope that something sparked your attention. I hope that something resonated with you. I hope that I give you something that you can implement. And I'm looking forward to continuing to have this dialogue next Wednesday throughout the month of August, and just talking with other people who have made steps to move past fear and step into transition. If it blessed you, share with someone. Would love to hear from you guys. Y'all have a wonderful evening.